Many people who experience a fall struggle to find direction afterwards. But you've emerged as a leader in rehabilitation and second chances. At what point did you realize that your greatest failure could become your greatest calling?
I don't think I realized it. I think I hoped. You know, I think there are a lot of people who go through trauma of all kinds who are desperate to imagine and to hope that whatever the struggle has been, that it could be actually used for good, right? That it wouldn't be wasted.
Yeah.
And while I was in prison, you know, one of the things that happened is, you know, I fell in love with prisoners. They were my brothers, they were my friends. They taught me, they loved me, they cared for me. I had my best birthday. I had my best Christmas, my best Easter, my most joyful moments of laughter, all in prison, up to that point in my life. And so the idea that I would come home and forget about all that and not think about prisoners again was ridiculous to me. I had no idea how much more I had to learn before I could ever find myself in a position to really care about prisoners and the struggle that they have in our communities.
Next level, we're reaching for the sky. Next level thinkers, we're aiming high.
Chip, awesome, man. Thank you. I'm so excited. Welcome to the Next Level Thinkers of Charting New Horizons, a Billion podcast, man. It's so awesome to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Rush.
You know, we were talking a little bit off camera and the relationship I've forged with the organization, Prison Entrepreneurship Program.
Yeah.
It's been a tremendous blessing to my life. As you know a little bit about, you know, as
But you're a blessing to us too.
Thank you so much. You know, as we shared off camera, this being part of this organization has also been a form of healing for my personal life too. You know, it's like, say, break down these walls, unshackle the chains that have bound me for so long that I've kept hidden or chose not to share. So being able to evolve as in my level of humanity and understanding the struggles that I face in this experience has been a blessing. So I wanted to make sure you knew that. I tell you that. So it's a pleasure to tell you that.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Awesome. No, it's great. Before we start, let's talk about a little bit about PEP and what it is and all that good stuff.
Well, as briefly as possible, PEP is about transforming lives, restoring families, and rebuilding communities. The guys inside, you know, who are many of them really hoping and working towards having a new life. What PEP opens the door for hopefully for all of them, is an opportunity to dream and then to pursue that dream with some very, very tangible teaching and with the support of a community. But what's really special about PEP that is, quite frankly, I've not seen anything like this across the country, is that the community that we really focus on building on the inside actually transcends the fence and is also present on the outside. So our participants who are part of the community and thriving there inside prison get to come home to the community on the outside, to the same community. And it's been an amazing journey for me, and I'm learning too. You know, this is a world where, if you're open to it, there are lessons and healings that can happen all along this journey. And being a part of a PEP, for me, has been a healing experience as well.
Awesome. You know, yeah, it's so true. It's been many lessons about it and some amazing, omnipotent experiences that you get to be a part of and being part of the organization. So we'll talk more about that. But first, we want to talk about the man behind the purpose. And so much of your life has been about reinvention. Doctor, hedge fund manager, incarceration, CEO of PEP. When you've had to start over, how do you know what parts of yourself to hold on to and what to leave behind?
Well, I guess in general, I would say the thing you want to hold on to is the thing that is good, the thing that is noble, the thing that is pure, the thing that is lovely. You want to hold on to those things, but you also don't want to ignore that the ugly parts of who I have been and the painful things that I've experienced and even the trauma that I've caused, there's actually good that can come from that too, right? I mean, one of the beautiful things about redemption is that it isn't just that you become a better person. It's actually that the suffering and the tears of everything that came before can actually be used for the good, right? So it's not wasted.
Yeah.
And so those transitions that I've had in my life, some of them were transitions that I signed up for. They were my choices. Yeah. Some of them were not transitions that I signed up for. I certainly at the time didn't sign up for going to prison and becoming a prisoner. But looking back on it, that was arguably the best and most important transition of my life. Wow. Because through that transition, I left behind a man that, quite frankly, needed to die.
Wow. That's amazing, man. Thanks for sharing that. That's so impactful. It's very, like raw and organic, and it has so much depth, and there's more exploration. We could get into that alone. Prison forces, as you know, prison forces a level of solitude that few ever experience. What did isolation teach you about yourself, now that we talked about that? And what was there a specific moment where you recognized that your past definition of success was no longer sustainable?
Well, so the idea of loneliness and isolation actually changed for me through my prison experience. So I think for most of my incarceration, I was surrounded by people. I mean, there are periods of time, and we've talked about this, where you might be in segregation or isolation, and I certainly had some of those as well. But there's actually an experience of loneliness when you're surrounded by people who you don't feel like really get you or understand you, that actually makes your sense of isolation heightened, even though you're around people.
Yeah.
And I experienced that in prison, and that really opened my eyes to the loneliness that I felt, even going back to my childhood as a young man, as an early teenager. My sense of not fitting in and desperately wanting to was actually one of the things that led me down a very dark road in my early childhood. And so the isolation that I experienced in prison initially was very helpful to understand, what does it mean to be part of a community? What does it mean to be known and loved, and to desperately want that?
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, there were amazing people around me for most of my life, and I was just not the kind of person that could accept or be in a relationship that was really had the depth that my relationships in prison actually opened for me.
Wow, that's amazing, and also, like you said, you're wanting, but also that you learn how to respect the relationships that you're part of today and in the future. You know, it's so amazing. Many people turn to faith in moments of crisis, but sustaining it beyond desperation is a difficult challenge. How has your faith evolved, not just as a survival mechanism, but as a true guiding force in your leadership and life?
Well, so for most of my life, I would describe myself as a person of religion, not really of faith. Religion was more of a tradition for me for most of my life. And what happened in the months prior to my incarceration was something that I never really thought, I never imagined was possible. I had an experience with a living God, not just the idea of a God. And that was really the beginning of my faith journey, to be honest with you, because everything before that was just more of a, like I said, a ritual, a religion, or a tradition. And once I had a faith and that relationship, then my faith journey began. And what I found, I think, more than anything in that journey, is that the thing that unlocks the new level of growth and experience for me is one word, and that's obedience. Wow. So that's kind of been, for me, the path where I come to a place in my journey where I find that I'm thriving and I'm doing well, and there comes a place and a time where I have to obey something. And then that unlocks that next level of a journey.
Yeah. What a beautiful answer, man. That's such a beautiful answer, because it does, I agree with you 100%. It does come to a point where you have to be obedient. Off camera, we talked about, when we talked about my experience of hearing that small, still voice of God, and we said, how many times have we heard it? And Where were you when you heard that small, still voice of God speak to you?
So I was sitting in a room with about 700 men at a New Canaan Society national retreat. Again, feeling very alone. I was in the middle of a life breakdown, and I don't think anyone in the room really knew what I was going through. So surrounded by people, feeling very isolated and lonely. And I heard a story that was told by a man named Jack Deere about this person named Jesus who had a best friend. And it never crossed my mind, it never occurred to me that this person named Jesus, who I claimed to know, had a best friend. And there was nothing at that moment that I wanted more than a best friend. And so when I heard that, I immediately, it was like a light bulb went off and said, if Jesus can have a best friend, that means I could be his friend. And that's where things suddenly changed. That a door opened, a wall broke down, a stony heart began to melt. All of those things started to happen, and my life changed.
That's beautiful, man. Someone asked me that same question. Where were you? When were your moments with alone with Christ? Where were they impacted? So your story is amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Many people who experience the fall, many people who experience a fall struggle to find direction afterwards. But you've emerged as a leader in rehabilitation and second chances. At what point did you realize that your greatest failure could become your greatest calling?
I don't think I realized it. I think I hoped. I think there are a lot of people who go through trauma of all kinds who are desperate to imagine and to hope that whatever the struggle has been, that it could be actually used for good, right? That it wouldn't be wasted.
Yeah.
And while I was in prison, one of the things that happened is, I fell in love with prisoners. They were my brothers, they were my friends, they taught me, they loved me, they cared for me. I had my best birthday, I had my best Christmas, my best Easter, my most joyful moments of laughter, all in prison, up to that point in my life. And so the idea that I would come home and forget about all that and not think about prisoners again was ridiculous to me. I had no idea how much more I had to learn before I could ever find myself in a position to really care about prisoners and the struggle that they have in our communities.
Yeah.
I had a lot to learn.
Yeah. With that, that's a valuable point. Do you think that you had to get I guess you have to get intellectually, into it, understand the nuances of being incarcerated and how you could become a valuable asset. What was that journey like for you when you first took the first initial step of saying, okay, I'm gonna get into this, but I got to learn how to.
Well, I actually didn't take us. I didn't. So I'm pretty impulsive in a lot of ways.
Okay.
I'm getting better at that, but the journey was more along the lines where I decided, okay, I'm gonna create a group of people that love prisoners and people who are coming home from prison. And what I found was that on my own, my best attempts to love people who are coming home from prison sometimes were creating more problems than they were solving.
Yeah.
And so what I quickly learned was that I needed to have guidance. And that guidance, quite frankly, needed to be someone outside of me, needed to be God's guidance around how to care for each person that I was coming across. There is not a cookie cutter way to love groups of people.
Yeah.
And so each individual person needed to be loved uniquely and specifically for their circumstance and their situation. And I think the big part of the learning initially was that I needed to be guided. The next lesson, though, which came almost immediately afterwards, was a lesson around a very personal situation in my life, and it had to do with my daughter, who fell in love with a prisoner. And that prisoner was a very toxic relationship in our family. And I'll never forget, a woman spoke to me and said, "So you think you're called to love prisoners, but you don't love that one?"
Wow.
And so once again, my next lesson was, if I'm going to love any group of people, again, the way I'm going to have to do that is through God and not in my own strength.
Yeah, that's awesome. How much does humanity play a part of that in your maturity, do you think?
My humanity, I think it has to do with my weakness and my limitations, and that is the door that opens the opportunity for me to learn and to grow. I mean, look, I can smell pride a mile away, because in my life I've been the most prideful person probably I've ever known. And so what God has been doing in a very, very gentle way in my life is breaking down my own pride to a level where actually I could learn from him.
Yeah, that's awesome. I kind of understand what you're talking about. You know what I mean? It's like this next level conversation is what I was so desiring from to be a part of, and there's so many tools in that response for sure. Now you lead a Prison Entrepreneurship Program, a model that blends business training, mentorship, and character development for the incarcerated. What makes PEP so effective at preparing people for lasting change, and how does entrepreneurship transform the way we think about rehabilitation?
It's a perfect question, because it actually connects very directly with what we were just talking about. If there's anything that has happened over the 20 years of PEP's history, it's been learning. So when a group of entrepreneurs went into the Carol Vance unit in Texas and asked the members of the prison fellowship community there if anyone wanted to learn about business, and all their hands went up, that was the birth of PEP.
Wow.
That was the birth of the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, and that was 20 years ago. But over the last 20 years, we have learned, tried, stumbled, failed, and the program that exists today is the product of an iterative learning process that has been based on evidence, because from the very beginning, our very first employee was a man named Phi Tran, and he's today our Chief Operating Officer. And I'll tell you, he is the heart of this organization, because he has watched for 20 years this organization with the best of intentions have success and have failure.
Yeah.
And so the program as it exists today has as its core actually the last thing on your list: character. So character development and establishing what is good character and what does good character look like is the foundation of everything that PEP builds on, including and importantly entrepreneurship. And the essence of it is this: we could take anyone and give them tools to be entrepreneurs and even be financially very successful. The problem is that if that individual does not have good character, when you start to pour financial success or other successes into that person, into that vessel, they can't hold it.
Yeah.
And that was true in my own life. You know, as a hedge fund manager managing $3.5 billion, you know, there's a saying on Wall Street that money doesn't corrupt character, it reveals it. That's kind of what we're talking about, because the money that I was making actually revealed the toxicity of my own character.
Yeah, that, you know, it's so true. And honestly, you know, I say too that even I told you I was part of a behavior modification program, and those essential tools that you're giving in PEP is, you know, like for me it was core values. I had no core values. I didn't know what core values were. I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't have no guidance system to understand what that was. And so when I hear you talk about character, that is an essential part. And I know that some of the gentlemen that are incarcerated right now, that they didn't have those tools poured into them in their early life, so now they're having it to deal with it in their adult life. In some ways, do you think that getting those these character development things, getting them later in life is better than having them when they're younger?
I don't know. I had to learn some very hard lessons because I didn't have good character. I think that, you know, there was a time in our society where children were raised and the way they were taught was through the vehicle of talking about good character. And now, of course, we raise our children around science, technology, math, and English, right? I mean, it's much more about creating people that can take tests than establishing what good character is. And largely, our academic institutions, which were founded on creating leaders of good character, have abdicated that role. So I think that in my case, I think I would have spared a lot of people a lot of pain, including myself, if I had good character when I was young. But I think, look, the point is not when do you get it. The point is that you do get it.
Yeah.
And to the extent that that opens the door for a new kind of prosperity, I don't think of prosperity the same way I used to. And so having a new kind of perception of prosperity, look, being in a relationship with you and with the people at PEP, that's the richness of my life, brother. It's not what my bank account looks like.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. That was awesome, man. You've worked in medicine, finance, and now rehabilitation and entrepreneurship. Across all these spaces, leadership is crucial, and we were just talking about leadership a little bit. From your, and you talked a little bit about what is broken, but from your perspective, what is broken and how we develop leaders today, and what needs to change so that we cultivate the kind of high-impact thinkers who can truly transform industries and communities?
Well, we've certainly been talking about part of it, right? And that's character.
Yeah.
I mean, I've led groups of people, whether it's, in the hospital or it's on a trading floor. I had a group of people that were very driven, very success-oriented, and very capable, making millions and millions of dollars, and I was a terrible leader. I mean, I led them often in directions that turn my stomach when I think about it today. So I think when we think about developing leaders, I'll tell you the group of people who I think are the best leaders that I've been exposed to are incarcerated. These men are resilient, capable, they are creative, they are honest, open, they hold each other accountable, they understand and pay attention to the nuances of communication in ways that we have completely forgotten out here in the free world. Those are all really essential ingredients to a leader, a leader that leads from the front and not the back, a leader who says, imitate me, don't just follow my orders. These are the kinds of leaders, quite frankly, that I think will take us into a new era in our community.
Yeah, that's so awesome. It's so true too, because I've had interactions with the individuals that are involved in the PEP program at the SS unit, right? And I sit down with them, and you can tell that this thing's working because they'll pull me up on my own. They'll pull me up. They'll pull me up and say, "Rush, man, you gotta watch that language, man." I'm like, okay, we're, pull my ghetto side up, you know what I mean? So I'll be like, man, I gotta remember, you're not, you're supposed to be an example. But I love that fact that some of the guys have done that. They'll say, hey, Rush, watch that language a little bit. I'm like, all right, but I understand because I respect that so much because they're trying to be disciplined in how they speak, how they present themselves, and they're being polished. And
Well, Rush, you were in the Army, right? And and I know that no matter what venue we've been in, there are people who are appointed leaders who are not leaders.
Yeah.
And then there are people that, regardless of their appointment, they're leading.
Yeah.
And that can be a man who's pushing a broom, cleaning a microwave, balancing a checkbook, or a person in a position of leadership. And so leadership is there's a raw anointing of leadership that regardless of where you are, you're leading.
Yeah.
And yet, I think in our society, we don't necessarily look for that raw given talent.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, I see it everywhere in prison.
Yeah, there's some guys I'm like, holy cow, especially when they do their pitch presentation, said how long have they been working on this, and just the creativity with with the small amount of resources, they make this dynamic presentation of it. It's amazing. Your current mission is about impact and transformation. If you had to define success now in a single sentence, what would it be?
For me, success on a daily basis is loving the people in front of me.
Wow.
That's it.
That's it. That's amazing. That's a lot. That's amazing. Okay. Last question. Let's see. One day, long after you're gone, your story will be told. What is the one thing you hope people will say about you?
That he trusted God. That's it.
That's it. I love that, man. As I know where you're from. When you say that, because I've said, like we talked about. Did you hear that voice? Go back home. Go back to Texas. Be obedient. Walk down this walk. You're gonna finish 3 degrees. And if you go down this way, and being obedient and trusting God is a big mantra of mine too. 100%. It didn't get me to be sitting with the CEO of Prison Entrepreneurship Program for nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, okay, so let's wrap this up. I do one thing with every one of my guests is I give them an opportunity to give somebody a shout out, some either individuals that or somebody that's you say, hey, I need to give a shout out to this person or this group of people, that kind of thing.
The person in my life who needs the shout out, who deserves the shout out more than anyone, is my wife. This year we're going to celebrate 29 years of marriage, and there is no one on the planet that has suffered more because of me than her. And so to my wife, I love you, and I'm so grateful that you've chosen to be with me. Thank you.
Her name? We got to say her name?
Cheryl.
Cheryl, okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Chip.
Rush.
Awesome, man. It's great to have you on Next Level Thinkers at Charting New Horizons of Brilliance podcast. When I really looked at the totality of this, the mindset of you being part of an organization that gets out into the, and it nosedives into humanity, looks for solutions to elevate, to get people to that evolutionary zone of thinking that I say. Is that you were saying it in there, and I was like, man, that's my thing, man. I just stole that from me. Evolutionary zone of thinking. I was like, there's that evolutionary zone of thinking and being and acting. What they say, love is an act of being, and if you understand that, then we're going places. So I'm very fortunate to have this opportunity to speak with you today and share some insight, or share some insights today on Next Level Thinkers Charting New Horizons.
Thanks for having me, Rush. It was great to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks.
All right, guys, that's it for Next Level Thinkers at Charting New Horizons of Brilliance podcast. As I always say, have peace and enlighten you, and remember that the ocean refuses no river.
Next level, we're reaching for the sky. Next level thinkers, we're aiming high.